record. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our last interview for the week of library professional development. This is Josh Hughey. He is a academic librarian here at Pasadena City College. So if you go to the library, you might see Josh there. So I've known Josh for a really long time. So we worked together in Anaheim a long, long time ago. I can't even remember how long ago it was. So let me go ahead and thank you for taking the time today. And we have a few questions for you that they submitted. So the first one, can you walk me through your journey into the fields of librarianship? What inspired you to pursue a career in libraries? And how has your professional path evolved over time?
Okay. If I get off track, let me know. I'll do my
Okay.
best to answer it. But it wasn't super intentional to end up being a librarian. I got a job when I was in high school, after school, working at a public library shelving books. So I was a library page. And that basically came about just because I had a really hard job after school and I was tired of my very hard retail job that involved like lots of lifting and manual labor and stuff at a hardware store. So I found out about jobs available at the library, and that sounded a lot better. So I got a job shelving books after school, and I just had a lot of interest at that point, working in a library. And so from shelving books, I ended up working at the circulation desk for a little while. And then I had a job at that library, at a public library that doesn't exist at most libraries anymore. I worked in a periodicals room. So
Oh,
for a few years, I worked in a periodicals room, basically processing and cataloging journals and magazines and newspapers. And then we were there to help people find things, sometimes on microfilm or through newspaper indexes. So you don't see a lot of that anymore. From there, I got my first academic library job working as a computer lab assistant at Roosevelt University in Chicago. And I did that for just a little while. And then my next library jobs were in public libraries. I worked at Anaheim Public Library, which is where I met Ginger, as a library technician there. I also had a weird job around that time for a while, a full-time job while I was working at Anaheim part-time. I was a distance education circulation assistant. So basically what I did was I was a library assistant at Chapman University, and I would find things at the main library for students and faculty that were at other campuses away from the main campus, would find them for them and then send them out to them. So that was a job I had for a while. I took a little bit of a pause in my library work. I had my own graphic design company with a couple friends for a while. And then after all that, I came back to work here at PCC. Um, and I was a library technician full-time here at PCC, primarily working in cataloging and acquisitions. And that's when I decided I wanted to be a librarian. So even though by that point I'd been in libraries for a really, 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 really long time, I'd always had other things going on in my life that I was interested in. I went back to school as an older adult. So I didn't get my bachelor's degree until I was in my 30s. And then I came back here to work at PCC as a technician. And that's when I was in this environment. I said, I think I want to be a librarian. So I applied to go to Syracuse University through their online MLIS program, got my master's. And it just so happened not long after I got my master's, a librarian position opened up here at PCC. And I became a librarian here at PCC. I skipped a lot of stuff along the way, but that's the basics of my library path. I didn't really know. I worked in libraries throughout most of my adult life, but I didn't decide I wanted to be a librarian until like about 8 years ago or so.
I think I'm pretty much the same because I got my master's in 2019. So,
Okay.
and I
Same.
started school in 2017. So, yeah.
Mhm.
just kind of did it, but didn't think I was going to actually do it. I don't know. So you've worked in different types of libraries. What's the difference between academic and public, in your opinion?
Okay, so one of the cool things about working at a community college library is it is kind of a mixed model and that we do serve the community here as well. We're not as able to meet the demands of the community in the way the public library does in terms of like readers advisory or more popular works,
Mhm.
sort of like leisure reading, but we do allow members of the community to come in. The principal difference between the work that I do here at PCC and what I've done at public libraries in the past is that everything here is very student focused, and then to a lesser extent faculty support or instructional faculty support. I'm faculty too, but in other words, I work a lot with faculty to help them acquire resources that they're going to use in their class. So if like an English professor says, hey, I'm gonna use this book as a required text in the fall. Can you see if you can get it for me as like an unlimited user ebook? Or can the library get some copies to support the students? I work with faculty in that way. And then in terms of students, it's becoming familiar with the needs of our students more generally. I'm sure that in this class you talk a lot about user need. So the specific user need that I deal with is curriculum support. It's kind of my job and the other librarians here's job to be familiar with the types of assignments students are working on, what's expected of them and the courses they typically take here at PCC. And if I'm not familiar with a certain assignment or a particular course, I sit down with a student or I'm in online chat with the student or in an appointment with a student trying to learn as much about their assignment as I can so I can make sure that they get connected to the resources that help them best complete that assignment. So it's very student focused and faculty focused. At a public library, it's way more like diverse in terms of you can get lots of different types of questions, lots of different types of interactions. You could be lending all kinds of different things, lots of different programs. Here, our mission, our collection development policy, everything we do is targeted towards how do we help students. So I guess that's probably the main difference between a community college library and a public library.
So, going off of the fact that you do work with faculty, somebody asked, do you work closely with the instructors at the school? And if so, what ways do you assist their classes? So, do you want to expand a little bit on that?
Sure, that can happen in a variety of ways. Probably the one that comes to the forefront of my mind is that we do what we would call one-shot instruction. So an instructor decides, we're going to be doing this paper or this project in my class. Students are going to need to use outside sources as support or evidence in their works cited, or maybe to help them just learn more about a topic so that they can speak to it. I'd like them to learn more about what they can find at the library. So I'll work with an instructor. They'll share their assignment with me so that when they bring their class in, it's not just like a general library orientation. It's me being familiar with their assignment and then saying, okay, these are the resources that we have that students will probably want to spend time on because we have at PCC Library, we have like over 100 databases. So when a student goes to the library website, sometimes it can be intimidating or they don't know where to start. So it's a way for us to say, okay, you're in this class. These are probably the resources you're going to want to target your time toward. And then once you're in these resources, these are the types of ways you might want to build a search or what you want to pay particular attention to when you're using these types of articles. Here's how to read them. Here's what to look for. Um, Another way that I might help faculty in addition to doing that type of instruction is I'm the librarian who spends the most time on acquisitions here. So that's kind of my area of focus is acquiring books, ebooks, other resources here at the library, renewing our databases, maintaining our relationships with vendors to make sure that we have access to the databases. So a lot of times faculty will contact me because they're like, hey, I really want the library to have this book or access to this resource or this database. How can we do that? So I'll work with faculty to find out if that's something that we can get, how we can get it. Sometimes it's about seeing if there's a way that we can get a resource so that students don't have to pay for it. So if there's a way I can acquire an ebook so that as many users at a time can access it as possible, and then an instructor wants to assign it, that way they don't have the students don't have to pay for a book. So that's another way I support faculty. I suppose that's the two main ways is just through instruction, collaborating with those research sessions, and then also finding resources, books, other things that support their assignments.
So in terms of collection management and collection development, how do you specifically have another do you oversee the whole collection or is it just like what the instructors need?
So all of the librarians at PCC are responsible for selecting materials for the collection. So it's not just me, and then everybody has kind of their area of focus. So
Okay.
everybody has the freedom to select whatever they think best supports the curriculum. However, each of us has subject areas that we focus on to divide the labor. And then we also, to that and we also try to collaborate or reach out to faculty in those areas so that we have some relationships with them. Um, I, though, am kind of the point person for if just general requests are coming through, like they're just saying, hey, library, can I get this thing? I'm usually the person that handles it if they don't go through a particular librarian, or if one of the librarians is assisting a faculty member and they can't figure out how to get something or they're not sure if we can get it, they'll probably escalate it to me. So then I'll try to see if there's some other way we can get it outside the normal channels, maybe like a vendor we don't have a relationship with, or acquiring funds somehow to get something that maybe we don't have the funding for.
So in terms of weeding, how do you go about that for your sections?
Okay, so it's different at every library,
Yeah.
obviously, but here it's something that I would say, if I'm being kind, gets backburnered sometimes. It's not always a task that gets a lot of
Yeah.
focus, even though it's a really important thing to do. So what ends up happening is that myself and my colleague, Mary, who's the cataloging librarian, acquisitions and cataloging kind of work hand in hand. We have a lot of things that we do that require collaboration with one another to make sure the collection's clean, the data is clean, things are being put in the system correctly, keeping track of what's coming in, what's going out. So a lot of times if we feel like librarians haven't weeded in a while, or maybe weeding is something that needs to get done, we'll try to run reports that facilitate like, hey, you might want to take a look at this. You know, we ran a report for your area. Here are some things that seem like they're low usage or out of date. And then myself as an acquisitions librarian, I'll oftentimes look at things too like that to maybe see not just if weeding needs to happen, but maybe I'm noticing that, okay, yeah, this needs to be weeded, but if we completely weed it, there won't be enough on that subject. So maybe I need to take a look at acquiring some new resources. Sometimes it might be something like, this is low usage, but it's not something we don't want to have any coverage in. So maybe I want to get an e-resource for that so that we're, if we remove these books from the collection that don't seem like they're getting used very much, at least we know we have e-resources to support someone if they're looking for this information and we don't have books on the shelf. So it's everyone's responsibility to handle weeding in their subject areas, but sometimes it's my responsibility that if folks don't have time to do that, that I'm kind of following up on it and taking a look around to see if that's something I can help out with.
I feel like weeding's always kind of like, oh, that's like a back project. Like
Yeah.
I have not weeded my section in a while here either. So it's like, oh, I probably should do that.
Yeah.
But then it gets expensive. So to replace things. So speaking
Mhm.
on that, what do you think are some of the issues facing limited resources within a university library in terms of funding?
Yeah. So that's always the thing is like, how much money are we going to get? Um,
Right.
and why? And how do we ask for more? And how does that work? And
Mhm.
um, speaking strictly from a community college perspective, as opposed to maybe a public library, the lion's share of our money is spent on databases. So um, it's like, you know, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 times what we spend on books, including ebooks, is spent on databases, because most students that are going to college need peer-reviewed articles, peer-reviewed content, journal access, things like that, and that's what costs the most money, by far more than books. So that's usually what we're trying to maintain. We want to make sure that we're maintaining that amount of money. We're usually having to do more with less when it comes to our book budget.
Mhm.
Um, that tends to be the thing that administrators have an easier time shaving off bits from than the database budget. Um, a lot of fighting for resources also has to do with helping people who are not um, in the day-to-day of libraries understand how stuff works for a library, because a lot of times administrators, other faculty, other stakeholders, board members have ideas about what happens in a library or how it works, without actually having a full understanding of what's involved. So um, that could be like explaining to somebody, hey, we can't get an ebook for this. Well, I can get it on Amazon. Okay, sure. A consumer can get an ebook on Amazon for one person. We don't
Yeah.
have money, nor does the publisher allow for me to buy access for 24,000 full-time students. It's just a
Right.
different model. Um, sometimes doing more with less means that there's certain things we can't do. Like we don't participate in ILL to the level that probably like a university does, definitely like a university does here at this community college. We do participate in ILL, but we don't have the money to ship books out constantly, nor do we have the collection size to be able to afford to lose a lot of our collection to ILL. So that would be like an example of something we don't participate in as much. Um, but I would say we've been pretty lucky in terms of keeping our resources budget together here. Another thing that I think is important to note for folks that are continuing on and that might get into the realm of managing a budget is it's not just about making sure you get the money, but making sure you spend the money and making
Mhm.
sure you spend the money in a way that reflects um, usage from the people that you're serving. So it's not just about picking out stuff that's cool to you, but making sure that you're getting the stuff that they're going to use so that when people start asking questions like, why did you get this? What was the point of this? Why did you spend money on this? You can say, well, we did it to support this class or this curriculum or this need. Um, and then also adjusting, sometimes you're going to pick things out or do things that aren't working or that aren't getting used. How are you going to shift gears? And making sure you spend that money because it is use it or lose it, especially when you're working for um, a city, a municipality, a state school. Like I'm a government employee. I'm a community college librarian, which means I'm an employee of the state. So if there's money that we have that's not being used, somebody else is going to want that money. So I got to make sure we're using it and it's not going unspent. So that's
Right.
another side of it too.
That's very true. Our fiscal year is coming to an end, and I'm trying to zero out everything that we have right now. So, yeah. Um, in terms of ILL, can you talk a little bit about ILL? Do a lot of students at PCC use ILL to request items? We did a whole thing on ILL and zip books. I was just wondering how much usage does it have? How, are students using ILL a lot at PCC?
We don't get a ton of ILL.
Okay.
I can't say the numbers for sure off the top of
Right.
my head. I would say that our most effective way of using ILL is for articles, only because usually those can be transferred electronically. I think at this point, by the time a student's asking for something at the college level, they need it. Like it's not the same as if I went down to LAPL and was like, "Oh, I really want to read this book and I got it ILL. It's
Yeah.
not life or death whether I read it tomorrow or 5 weeks from now. But for these students, if something's due in 2 weeks, they can't wait. for that book or that item. So I'd say a lot more of what we do is electronic requests for articles, and also letting students know that that's what's going to happen, because sometimes they've had experiences with ILL where they're like, I can't wait because it's going to take forever. Sometimes it's letting them know, hey, you have this option and it's actually really fast. We can get it quickly. I would say the majority of like ILL we do for books is probably through faculty. Sometimes it's through students, but a lot of times it's a faculty research need, something that they want to do that they're not on a super tight deadline for. We definitely don't do ILL at the scale that I had done it in a public library, which it seemed like we did a lot more ILL at a public library than here at PCC. And I'm sure that the UCs and the Cal States do way more
Right.
ILL. And they also have their own resource sharing between each other where they're sending books back and forth. That's a lot more robust than what we do here.
So I'm not really like familiar with research sharing in terms of articles. If I don't know if you know this, like it's a question that I'm asking off the top of my head.
Yeah.
How does that work with databases and like private like copyright and like contracts and sharing articles? Because everybody pays for their own databases, right? So
Yeah.
it's allowed to do that way.
So there's a certain amount you can do where, if we don't have access to a journal or a certain
Yeah.
article, we can get it through ILL. However, um, there is a mechanism by which if we were requesting like the same stuff over and over and over again,
Uh,
um, it could trigger the database, or it would probably be the database, the vendor being like, hey, you need to buy access to this if you're going to keep
right.
asking for the same stuff over and over again, because also it's supposed to be for one user use. So it wouldn't be appropriate for me as an instructor to say, oh, I need access to this book or this article, and I'm going to use the scan of it and put it up in my Canvas shell for my students, and
Right.
it's going to be part of my curriculum. That would not be within fair use. So at that point, I would need to talk to that instructor and be like, hey, we need to actually purchase access to this if you're going to use it.
Right.
Um, so it's fine to do IL requests for stuff we don't have access to in our databases when it's like, oh, I just need this article to use as evidence in this paper I'm going to write. That's totally fine. It's
Okay.
when you keep getting the same stuff over and over again, where it's like, hey, you need to get access to this journal. It's not the issue of you needing it's not going
Right.
away, so you need to purchase access.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about that. I'm like, how does that work? So here we go. Has being a librarian differed from what you thought it was going to be? Would you have chosen the same path if you knew what you were getting into?
Yeah, well, one of the benefits to, I guess, working in libraries for so long before I finally like pulled the trigger on being like, all right, I'm going to be a librarian,
Yeah.
is that I kind of waited until I found an area of librarianship that I was really interested in. So, in the years that I worked in public libraries, and I did a lot of different things. I mean, I was a technician and I did YA programming and I drove a bookmobile and I did all this different stuff, and that was cool. But it wasn't until I was in the environment here at PCC and I saw the student engagement, that I was like, oh yeah, that's what I want to do. The area of librarianship that I like the most is working with students. I like them asking me questions about their research needs. I like teaching toward research needs, helping them develop a research question, finding articles, finding information that they're hitting a wall on, and then working with them to be like, all right, let's figure this out. Let's find this stuff. That's when I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. That's what I'm interested in. Um, so it's kind of, I guess I'm answering the question backwards, because it's not, because I kind of knew what to expect because I was immersed in that. I've talked to people, and I'm sure this is something that you've encountered as well. There are people that go to high school, go to college, get their master's degree, and then they go and become a librarian.
Mhm.
And I'm sure that those people are met with lots of surprises because they maybe don't have a ton of experience working in libraries. I'd say that's especially true for, although I'm an academic librarian, university librarians that work like at a 4-year school especially if there are professors that work in a program where they're teaching in an MLIS program, that's a totally just different thing where I've met people in that world that have never checked out a book to somebody. They've never had any sort of interaction with a
Right.
user or a student because they're approaching it completely from an academic research way.
Right.
So it's just a different thing entirely, right? So I think that some of those folks, there are surprises. There are things they don't know about libraries, haven't encountered that if they switched gears and went to another into another area of librarianship, they'd probably be like, oh, this isn't what I expected at all.
Right.
Um, I do think that like if I was advising a student or having a one-on-one with a student that said, hey, I'm interested in libraries, I'd probably say, okay, well, maybe go get a job at a library that is the type of library you're interested in and see if that suits you. Um, because I loved my public library experience, but I knew I didn't want to be a librarian in a public environment. Um,
Mm.
and then I've known people that that's 100% their jam and that's what they want to do and they wouldn't want to do what I do. So um, surprises come for sure. If there weren't ever any surprises, I probably wouldn't want to do this job. It would probably be boring. So um, there are surprises that are not pleasant, but a lot of
Right.
surprises are cool things or new ways of looking at things or new types of assignments or new student needs, and those are cool.
Because so this is my first time, going into the academic world. So I was kind of like thrown in there, and coming from the public world, it's more my jam, like you would say, the public side. But I do enjoy working at PCC because I'm actually being asked reference questions, as
Mhm.
opposed to here. I really don't work with the public anymore. I'm in my office a lot, so I like want people to send questions in the chat so that I'm like, oh, I can help you, and it feels good to be able to help them. So I get it. There's a difference between public and academic, definitely. And just a short amount of time I've been at PCC, I've noticed that. And the type of
Yeah.
questions completely different.
Well, and to add another layer onto that, even within the academic world, I'll specifically say to community college because here at PCC, all of our librarians work at the reference desk, and all of our librarians do instruction of some kind or another.
Right.
So that's different, like from a university library where there are librarians that might not ever have many interactions with the student, or they work really limited reference desk hours. And so within the field of academic librarianship, there are academic librarians who are like, I just want to work on cataloging and systems and those kinds of like behind the scenes things. And I don't really want to work with students as much. And then there are people like me where it's like, if I didn't work with students, I would hate my job. Like
Right.
what the other stuff I do is like what I do when I'm not working with students. Like working with students to me is like the heart of it. And then I do these other things. Whereas other people are like, yeah, the stuff that I do when I'm in my office, that's when I get to really do work. And then, oh yeah, and I have to go like out to the reference desk and teach sometimes. So I'm at the flip of that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm more of like a people person. So when you move up in management, it's like, oh, you spend a lot of time in your office now. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's definitely here. I'm not as engaged with like circulation like I was in my previous jobs. So like I get kind of nervous when I have to go up to circ for something. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, so
Yeah.
somebody help me. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely
If you stop, like if you get a position in a library where you interact with people less, it can cause like anxiety about them being on a desk with people because then you're like
yes.
they're gonna ask me stuff I don't know. I don't like they're gonna ask me how to do something I don't know how to do. So to me, it's better to have regular hours on a public facing desk because then you don't get nerves about
Yeah,
having to,
that's how I feel here.
yeah.
I get nervous at Monrovia when I'm on the desk because I'm like, oh my God, what are they going to ask me? I don't know. So, and I also agree that people should get a job if they can in a library before they go to library school or grad school
Mhm.
because it's very surprising to people once they start working. And I feel like having that experience is also good for you when you try to interview for librarian positions because I know for us, when we interview people for librarian positions and they don't have any work experience in a library, it's
Yeah.
usually harder for them to get the position. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
And whether you're getting the technician, technician certificate or you're getting a master's, neither one of those things is a ticket to a job. Like you really have to put your best foot forward and try to get, even whether it's shelving books or working at the circ desk or whatever it is, do whatever you can to get in the door, volunteering, whatever.
Right.
And that out, and that's for the person too to figure out, is this somewhere I want to be? Um, I think it's important.
Let's see. What are some ways that you see libraries moving into the digital age, both in terms of the products and services they provide people, as well as in terms of how to reach their broader and increasingly, well, isolated public? I think for us, it would be more like for the online students. How do you
Mhm.
see technology increasing for them in terms of library
Yeah,
use?
so we're definitely there, and we're definitely at the point now where, um, you know, you, I mean, it's a huge part of my job is trying to figure out, all we're ever trying to do in libraries is try to reach as many of our users as we can and meet as many of the needs of our users as we can. So we have to think about, how do we have services that meet people here on ground? How do we meet them online? For some it's a mix of both, and it just depends. But for us, I'm trying to figure out, all right, now that most of our users, if not all of our users, have some sort of way of accessing resources online, even if it's on their phone or whatever it is, I'm going to gravitate toward those resources, because if I can find an ebook that has an unlimited user license that everybody on this campus can access at the same time, I'm going to prefer buying that to just a copy of a book. As fond as I am of books, um, you know, I'm going to prefer the mode of access that serves the most people. So that's usually what my mindset is. That being said, as an educator, I'm also interested in multiple modalities of reaching people. Some people still want print, and I'm one of those people. I like having a book, but I know that that doesn't scale to our user right now. I'm never going to be able to buy enough print materials to scale to the amount of users we have and the way that they want to access us. There are PCC students that may never set foot on this campus because they're going to do the whole thing online from start to finish. And that's cool. That's great. So I want to make sure that they have things that they can access. A lot of what concerns us, when we move into that realm, is also, um, accessibility in terms of what kind of barriers are they going to meet in terms of proxy authentication? How do they get to these resources? How are they logging in? How are instructors embedding these resources into their courses? And how can we support them in making sure that the library resources are being integrated into their online modality in a way that students can easily access it? Are they linking properly? Are they embedding videos that we offer properly? I didn't even mention that I spend tons of time trying to find movie licenses for faculty. That's like one of the things I spend a lot of my time on. So, and then once we get that stuff, it's one thing for me to be like, all right, cool, we bought this. We have access to it. Do we have public performance rights for it? Like, what if a club on campus asks me, hey, we want to show this movie in the quad? And I got to make sure that they can. Um, if somebody's like, hey, I want to make sure that my online course can see this movie, I got to make sure that it can stream in such a way that they could all watch it at once. I think there was a question in there about how do you keep up with like emerging trends or
Right.
changes, right? So that kind of goes with this question, is I have to like keep on top of when things change in terms of, the IT department on our campus decides they're going to change how students authenticate. All right, I need to go meet with other administrators to be like, are they going to be able to access the database? Is this going to interrupt access? How does that affect streaming video? Things change whether we want them to change or not. So we have to be able to roll with that. Um, so yeah, it's in terms of the e-resources, digital, it's as much or more a part of my job than anything that happens within this building. Um, it's probably more of my job than what happens like between the front and back door of this building in terms of
Right.
physical collection. So
Speaking of movies, there's a movie I wanted. I was checking to see if we had it in our databases because I was going to offer it as extra credit, but we don't have it. So I'll tell you later on. Maybe we can get it
Yeah,
so I can
let me know.
have them use it next semester or when I teach again. Let's see. Can you describe a recent project or initiative that you were proud of? So, what were the objectives, challenges, and outcomes of this project? And it could be anything, any project you've ever worked on. Your most proud, like your proudest project that you've worked on.
Huh. You know, oh, well, I'm okay. I'm going to give two examples
Okay.
because at this point of my career and where I'm at, there's like these little victories that probably don't seem that exciting in this format in terms of like it's not a big deal, but this acquisitions role I'm in it because somebody who was doing acquisitions left and somebody just had to do it. And it wasn't my role. And I was helping manage access services. And I was dealing with a lot of technology stuff in the library, but somebody had to handle acquisitions. So I was like, all right, I will take that over and pass my other duties on to somebody else. Um, so in the last couple years, I had to kind of learn on the fly how this stuff works. And as I sort of already said, there's all these considerations that come into it that I didn't know how to navigate before. So one of those was just managing a budget and dealing with purchasing and dealing with all the ins and outs of how do we ask for money? How do we make sure something gets paid? How do we deal with it when people that are in our purchasing department say you can't do that, and then I got to turn around and say we can't buy this, and how do I convince
Right.
people that we should buy it? There's all these little victories every day just learning about that to me are a huge deal, just keeping up with that. I'd say like in terms of like a major project I worked on in the past that I'm proud of, um well, to bring public libraries into it, it was really cool. When I was at Anaheim, when we got a grant for Spanish language materials, and
Yeah.
that was really cool because at that time I was in charge of when CDs were still something that people checked out a lot. I was in charge of the music, and that was really neat because I didn't know a lot about the music that I was supposed to order for this grant, so it really was my first opportunity to be like, how can I reach out to as many people as possible to try to get this information? So some of that was like just talking to people one-on-one. Some of that was like trying to like do little informal surveys with people to find out like what music is important to you. Then also doing a lot of my own research to be like, what are the different genres that tend to be the biggest in terms of Spanish language music? And of course, that's like super diverse, right? Just like any music that I already knew about that had English vocals, every type of music has Spanish vocals. But
Right.
like, how am I going to allocate this money? What is our community interested in terms of Spanish language music? And then I partnered with like a local record store so that I could get us a deal on getting like wholesale CDs so that like I didn't have to buy them retail and all kinds of stuff like that. So it it was lucky for me as a technician that I got to kind of get this primer of being a librarian and doing collection development, also developing a collection that I didn't know anything about. So I had to do a lot of work in terms of like I had to learn about these types of music and what our users were going to care about. So that was really cool for me. And then also as a part of that, that kind of showed like, hey, we should give him some money to develop this collection because these things are checking out. So then I was given more money and more leeway to order for the music collection there because they saw that I could develop it in such a way that it was building usage. So I got to do a lot of research and background on figuring out what types of stuff we should get and what was moving out the door. So.
Mhm. Um, Pretty much all the questions that I had from the students, but I was just going to say, so the other person I interviewed, Kurt, he also drove the bookmobile for a little bit at Anaheim.
Oh,
So, and for Aziza. So, do you have like a fun little story to end it with about your time driving the bookmobile and the type of book? Oh, you want to tell them about the bookmobile, what it was? Did you drive the big one or just the bus?
I drove both of them.
Okay.
So originally, that was another cool thing that came up because um, in the past, at Anaheim at least, they would try to find drivers, and the drivers would learn how to do some library stuff, like how to check out books or whatever. And then it became a thing where it's like, well, maybe the more sustainable solution is to find library people that want to learn how to drive rather than find drivers that want to learn how to work in a library. So that's what our supervisor at the time decided to do. So a couple of us that were library employees said, okay, we'll learn how to drive these vehicles. So at first they just had us learn how to drive the bus, which is one type of license. But then they said, well, do you want to also learn how to drive the semi-truck bookmobile? And so we said, okay. And then we learned how to drive that, which is a whole other type of license. That was really cool for me because it was actually really scary. There were some scary things that happened. It's not easy to drive those vehicles, and there were a couple of harrowing experiences in those vehicles. Um, but I think that like the bigger picture thing is just being open to experiences, and when opportunities happen to learn something in a library, take advantage of that. That was a really cool thing that I got to do that I never thought I would end up doing. And I had a truck driving license, so I could have been a truck driver for a while. But one of the cool things about working on the bookmobile was when you work in a library and you're always just, it's always about user need. What do our users want? How do we find out what our users want? Well, when you go into communities, there's like no better way to find out what users want because you're going to them. They're not even coming to you. And then if you're in their neighborhood and they're coming on the library, we took so many requests because once they found out, hey, if I go in there and ask for something, they'll bring it for me next week. It was like constant engagement. It's probably the most direct engagement with users that I've ever had in any library environment where I knew the users on my bookmobile stops that I went to because I saw them at the same time. It's not like they just come in whenever. It's like they know that on that day at that time you're going to be there. So it was a lot of children, so I knew like a lot of kids' names. I knew the type of stuff they liked, so they didn't always even have to ask for it. I'd see it and I'd know it was coming. So I'd be like, oh, I know that so and so on this street is going to want that, so I'm going to grab it for him or her. Um, so I think the coolest thing about bookmobile service is just immersion in a community. Um, it's unlike anything else. And I really think like um, I think it's something that if it's something that's in a community and you have an opportunity to work in that environment, it's like one of the purest ways to learn the theory of we meet user need. Like that is what we do. Because then you can do all kinds of stuff that aren't typical library stuff, right? You can bring things into their community, like programming or whatever that's specific for them that you learned because you're immersed in them, you know what's going on with them. So
Yeah, yeah, bookmobiles are definitely fun. And like you said, you get to know everybody. And I kind of miss it. I did it a little bit here. We have a little electric van, basically looks like a golf cart with books on it, but it's not the same. I think the best times I had were in Anaheim on the bookmobile. Definitely some
yeah.
stories that would probably get us in trouble if our
Yeah.
supervisor knew about. So,
Well,
um,
and not just get us in trouble, but I got in trouble a few times. I definitely made some driving decisions that I wish I could have had done over again, but you drive and you learn. So.
yes. Is there anything else you want to add before we finish up the interview?
No, just I think I've said it a billion times, but libraries are just whatever our users want them to be. So whenever folks are in school and learning about that, I just say, be open-minded to what the people you're working for, which are the users and the community work in want. And then that's what we do. So if that's not books, as much as that might break our heart to not be books, we focus on the stuff that they want, or we figure out how to get the books that meet them where they're at. So that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Josh, for taking the time to chat with us today. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.